neon-lit heart of the world's most modern metropolises, a sound is rising that shouldn't exist. For decades, the global music elite dismissed Russian folk as a relic of the past, dusty, rural, and irrelevant to the pulse of the digital age. They were wrong. As you read this, a sonic revolution is tearing through the skyscrapers of London, New York, and Tokyo, blending ancestral whispers with the brutalist grit of the city. Something ancient has been awakened, and it's no longer staying in the village. It has moved into the penthouse, and it's louder than anything we've ever heard. Stick with us, because the story of how a dying tradition humbled the titans of industry is about to change everything you know about music. But first, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. We want to see how far this sound has traveled. The skyscrapers of the 21st century were built on the silence of the past, designed to echo only the hum of electricity and the frantic pace of global commerce. In cities like Moscow, Berlin, and London, the youth had long ago traded their heritage for the polished, synthesized perfection of Western pop. To the high-level executives and glass offices, traditional music was a museum piece, something to be archived, not played. Russian folk, in particular, was viewed through a lens of condescension. It was seen as the sound of the plow and the hearth, a rural ghost that had no business in a world of high-frequency trading and neon lights. This dismissal was the industry's greatest mistake, a failure to realize that the most powerful rhythms aren't invented in labs, but are forged in the blood of generations. While the world looked forward, a small underground movement in the urban centers began looking back, not with nostalgia, but with a hunger for something real. They were tired of the plastic sheen of the charts and began to wonder what would happen if you plugged a 1,000-year-old soul into a 1,000,000-watt amplifier. At the center of this looming earthquake was a classically trained outsider named Victor, a man who lived in a cramped, soundproof apartment overlooking a sprawling industrial district. Victor didn't care for the pastoral beauty of the countryside. He loved the roar of the subway and the rhythmic clanking of construction cranes. Yet he was haunted by the white-voiced singing of his ancestors, a raw, dissonant, and incredibly powerful vocal technique that seemed to cut through concrete. He spent his nights sampling the screeching of train brakes and layering them over the haunting melodies of old Slavic laments. To his peers in the sleek clubs of the city, he was a madman chasing a dead dream. They told him that folk was for the history books, not the dance floor. But Victor knew something they didn't. The city is just a different kind of forest, and the shadows in the subway are just as deep as those in the taiga. He was preparing to launch a genre that would eventually be dubbed Cyber-Vosk, a brutal fusion of industrial techno and ancestral paganism. The tipping point occurred during the Apex Sonic Festival, a massive gathering of the world's most influential music critics and producers held in a converted steel mill in the heart of the city. The lineup was a predictable parade of glossy superstars and minimalist DJs, all of whom sounded exactly like the year before. The audience was bored, scrolling through their phones, waiting for something that didn't feel like a recycled algorithm. When Victor took the stage, the atmosphere was thick with skepticism. He didn't have a flashy light show or a team of dancers. He stood alone behind a wall of modular synths, holding a traditional gusli that looked like it had been salvaged from a shipwreck. As the first notes rang out, a low tectonic bass frequency began to shake the very foundations of the mill. It wasn't the sound of a club. It was the sound of a mountain waking up in the middle of a metropolis. The crowd stopped moving, paralyzed by a frequency that felt ancient yet terrifyingly futuristic. Then the vocals hit. Victor hadn't brought a typical singer. He had used AI to reconstruct the voices of a lost generation of village elders, processing them through heavy distortion until they sounded like digital deities. The sound was a wall of white voice harmony that pierced the industrial roar of the backing track. It was the Rusalka's cry reimagined for the fiber optic age. Music critics who had spent their lives analyzing the next big thing found themselves speechless. This wasn't just a new song, it was a total subversion of the urban aesthetic. The Russian folk elements, once mocked as simple, provided a complexity and emotional weight that the synthetic tracks lacked. It was as if the ghosts of the steppe had been given bionic bodies. The genre of Cyber-Vosk was born in that moment, proving that the most modern cities in the world were actually starving for a connection to the primordial. Within 48 hours, the recording of that set went viral, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of the music industry. It wasn't just the folk that captured people. It was the juxtaposition of the ancient with the urban. Young people in Tokyo began wearing traditional embroidery over techwear, and the clubs of Brooklyn started replacing deep house with tracks that featured the jagged, irregular time signatures of Russian choral music. The industry's underestimation became a frantic scramble to catch up. Major labels who had once laughed at the idea of folk music were now desperately trying to sign artists who knew how to play a balalaika through a fuzz pedal. They realized that they had been selling a shallow version of the future, while the real future was being built out of the indestructible bricks of the past. The city had been conquered not by a new technology, but by a sound that had survived centuries of silence. The global obsession with Cyber-Vosk began to reshape the architecture of the music world, leading to the great reconciliation between the digital and the organic. Producers discovered that the polyphonic structures of Russian folk were actually more complex than anything being produced in modern workstations. They began to study the way these old melodies moved, how they didn't follow the standard Western scales, but instead utilized microtones that felt off to the untrained ear but right to the soul. In the high-rise recording studios of Los Angeles, artists were now layering traditional Russian wedding songs over trap beats, creating a dissonant beauty that mirrored the chaos of modern life. This wasn't just a trend, it was a realization that the human ear is wired for the organic imperfection of folk music. The underestimated Russians hadn't just changed the charts. They had reminded the world that music is a form of spiritual survival, even in a world of glass and steel. As the genre matured, it moved beyond the clubs and into the very fabric of urban culture, influencing everything from high fashion to cinema. Filmmakers began scoring gritty, futuristic thrillers with haunting Russian vocalists, finding that the white voice was the only thing that could match the intensity of a high-speed chase through a neon cityscape. The contrast was the key, the vulnerability of the human voice against the coldness of the machine. The world musicians who had once looked down on these traditions were now the ones being laughed at for their lack of depth. The tables had completely turned. The new genre wasn't just Russian. It was a global language of resistance against the homogenization of culture. It taught the world that you can build a city as high as you want, but its heart will always beat to the rhythm of the earth. The story of Victor and the rise of Cyber-Vosk serves as a warning to those who believe that progress means discarding the past. In our rush to digitize every aspect of our lives, we often leave behind the very things that make us human. The Russian folk tradition was underestimated because it was viewed as primitive, but in reality, it was primal. It was a source of raw power that had been waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. Today, as you walk through any major city, you might hear a faint, haunting melody drifting from a basement window or a passing car. It's a sound that bridges the gap between the concrete under your feet and the sky above your head. It is a reminder that the old ways are never truly gone. They are just waiting for the city to get loud enough that they have to shout to be heard. Looking back at the explosion of this movement, the most shocking element was how quickly the experts were proven wrong. For years, the narrative was that to be global, you had to be standardized. You had to use the same 4 chords and the same polished production. Russian folk shattered that narrative by being unapologetically other. It forced the audience to listen differently, to accept dissonance, and to embrace the haunting beauty of sorrow. This emotional honesty was the secret weapon. In a world of curated social media feeds and perfect lives, the raw, unfiltered pain and joy of folk music felt like a cold shower. It woke people up. The urban landscape, which had become a desert of sameness, was suddenly flooded with the rich, dark colors of a culture that refused to be forgotten. The innovation didn't stop with the music. It birthed a new kind of urban mythology. In cities where people felt like cogs in a machine, the stories woven into the folk lyrics, stories of spirits, betrayal, and unyielding nature, began to take on new meanings. People started seeing Leshy in the city parks and Domovoy in their smart homes. The music had re-enchanted the world. The musicians who had once been dismissed were now the new shamans of the digital age, guiding the masses through the psychological labyrinth of the 21st century. They proved that the folk isn't a group of people in the past. The folk is us here and now, trying to find our voice in the noise. The genre was a mirror, reflecting our own forgotten depth back at us through a fractured, electronic lens. Today, the influence of this new genre is so pervasive that we often forget how radical it was just a few years ago. It has paved the way for other marginalized traditions to find their place in the urban soundscape, from Bulgarian throat singing to Andean pipes mixed with drill music. But the Russian influence remains the cornerstone, the original glitch in the system. It was the first to show that the more advanced we become, the more we need the primitive. The musicians who underestimated this power are now out of work, replaced by those who understand that the future is a circle, not a line. We are returning to where we started, but with the tools to make it louder than ever before. The final victory of this movement was the reclamation of the city itself. No longer is the urban environment seen as a sterile vacuum. It is now a playground for the ancient. The world musicians who once laughed at Russian folk now stand in awe as stadium-sized crowds in London sing along to melodies that were once whispered in the dark forests of Siberia. The genre has become a bridge, connecting the isolated individual to a collective history they didn't even know they had. It is a testament to the fact that culture is not something you buy, it's something you carry in your bones. And when those bones start to shake to the beat of a drum, no amount of technology can stop the vibration. As we look to the future, the legacy of this musical revolution is clear. The only way to survive the digital age is to keep one foot firmly planted in the soil. The skyscrapers may grow taller and the AI may get smarter, but the human heart will always respond to the white voice. It is the sound of our shared struggle, our shared history, and our shared hope. The Russian folk tradition wasn't a relic, it was a seed. And that seed has grown into a forest of sound that now covers the entire world. The city is no longer just a place of concrete, it is a place of song. This phenomenon also triggered a massive shift in the way we consume art. The viral nature of the movement wasn't just about catchy hooks, it was about sonic authenticity. In an era of deep fakes and misinformation, the physical reality of a voice strained to its limit, singing a melody that has survived 1,000 years, is the ultimate proof of life. People didn't just listen to this music, they used it to anchor themselves. The urban musicians who embraced this discovered that their brand became secondary to the truth of the sound. It was a humbling experience for an industry built on ego. The music was bigger than the artist, bigger than the label, and certainly bigger than the city. Furthermore, the economic impact was staggering. Traditional instrument makers, who were on the verge of bankruptcy, suddenly found themselves with back orders from every major city on Earth. The demand for authentic, handmade instruments skyrocketed as electronic producers sought the unique resonance that software simply couldn't replicate. This led to a new renaissance of craftsmanship in the heart of the industrial zones. Old factories were converted into workshops where the smell of wood shavings mingled with the hum of servers. The new genre had not only changed the sound of the city but also its industry, proving that tradition can be a powerful engine for modern innovation. The social cohesion brought about by this music cannot be overstated. In the hyperpolarized environment of the modern city, Cyber-Vosk became a unifying force. It didn't matter what your political background was. When the bass dropped and the ancient choir began to soar, everyone in the room felt the same ancestral chill. It provided a common ground that was neither east nor west, but human. This is the true power of the new genre. It transcends the artificial boundaries we build around ourselves. It reminds us that underneath the suits and the screens, we are all part of the same long, haunting story. In conclusion, the rise of Russian folk in the urban landscape is the ultimate underdog story of the 21st century. It is a story of how the underestimated became the unavoidable. It serves as a permanent reminder that no culture is ever truly obsolete, and that the most innovative ideas are often the ones we've simply forgotten. So, the next time you hear a strange, dissonant melody cutting through the noise of the city, don't dismiss it. Listen closely. It might just be the sound of the future, disguised as the past, coming to claim its rightful place in the neon light. The world is finally listening. Are you?